Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon, how are you doing?
Hi, James. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fabulously, thank you very much. What are we talking about today then?
Well, today we have a follow-up from our podcast we did a few weeks ago on difficult people. We are talking about actual difficult conversations that we face at work, because we all face them, inside and often outside work as well. And most of us dread those conversations. We find them challenging. They're part of the work that we hate and that we don't feel we do particularly well. Well, today that all changes, and we're going to help you think, plan, and act differently. Fortunately, you're not reliant on me and James. We have got Amanda Gilbert, who's a learning and development guru, who is going to share some ways of thinking and acting differently that will make difficult conversations easy.
I thought you were going to say she's a bona fide difficult person, and that's why we've got her on
No,
the
that's
show.
why we've got you, James.
Ah.
She's going to do some live management of difficult conversations with you.
Listen, we do. Online coaching.
I'm dreading
Fantastic.
it already.
Anyhow, before we get into that, James, what have you been up to?
I have mainly been choosing university courses this year. Also this week, my daughter wants to go to university.
Where are we
next
on to?
year.
You're on to like a tour of the UK.
Oh, yes, we are. We're on a tour of the UK, but now we're on a tour of all these places where you can't actually do the flipping course she wants to do. So she's decided she wants to do economics with French, with being the key word there. It's 75% economics, 25% French. That all sounds very good until you work out there are only two places in the country she can legitimately do that. One is Liverpool. She don't want to go there because I went to Liverpool. So no, that's just definitely not cool. And the other one's Nottingham. She sure as hell doesn't want to go there. So we've been having some pretty difficult conversations in our household about university choices. So that's what's been on in my life.
Well, I'm very proud of you, James, talking about economics with French without getting into the subject of French economics, where I'm sure you could have made all sorts of inappropriate jokes.
Anyway, so that's what I've been up to. How about you?
Well, I have finished a book, James, which
What, a whole one?
a whole one, and it was a real hard.
Hang on, when you say you finished it, did you listen to it or did you
I
read
read it. It was a physical book.
Bloody
Anyhow,
hell.
it's a recommendation I've got for everyone now, and it is called Invisible Women, and it's by Caroline Criado Perez. I recommend this book to every man who is either married to a woman, has daughters, or has a mother. And it should be read. It is incredible. The world is designed for men. It's not just the bias, it's the fact that data isn't collected about gender splits. So therefore, the assumption in so many things is around the average man. And I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't realized the extent of this. And anyhow, she's got thousands of examples there everywhere. But I thought I'd share just my top three. I don't say favorites, but top three. First one is crash test dummies in cars. They're male shape. And therefore, as a result, safety of cars is designed to protect men. So women are 47% more likely to be injured and 17% more likely to die in a car. Even when they do eventually test using female crash test dummies, all they do is shrink the male one down. So it's even not anatomically correct. Second one, in medical research, women form less than 25% of early tests for new drugs, which means that as a result, they are 50% to 75% more likely to react badly to new drugs that are on the market.
Hence the thalidomide scandal, no doubt.
And the final one I'll share, which is not quite as life and death, but did you know that women's hands are on average 2 centimeters smaller than men's, yet mobile phones have increased in physical size by 20% over the last decade? And the reason why they've done that is because the use cases that they have for mobile phones are things like watching sports, gaming, stuff like that. And so they want a bigger screen, fits in a man's hand so you can use it one-handed, fits in a man's pocket. Doesn't fit in a woman's hand. It's more difficult to use. They're more likely to get repetitive strain or drop it or have it stolen. Doesn't fit in a woman's pocket, but it's because it's designed using data around men and what men need and men's use cases. Anyway, I could go on all day, so I'll stop there. But this book, honestly, you have to read it. It's incredible and scary.
Very good. I will. I've got a wife and 2 daughters. Probably should.
We should probably all read it.
And Amanda is just nodding sagely because this is just how you experience the world.
Welcome these.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't like to say welcome. It's more, I got a glimpse and it was scary. Anyhow, Amanda, what have you been up to since you last were with us?
Yes, it's been a while, but what have I been up to? So did I mention to you before that we had a new puppy? He's been around for a while, so he's taken over our lives in a way that's completely mad. I think we've reached that stage in life where we're getting a little bit older, so the last thing you want is the most energetic dog in the world in your life. And we seem
That's
to
what
have
you've bought.
fallen into the... Yeah, I got ourselves a little Cocker Spaniel puppy who is the most energetic breed, but he's really so much fun. So that's probably one of the big pieces of news. Lots of work around good stuff, listening to you guys and your podcast, amused by your Difficult People podcast. So excited to be in this conversation and adding some more tools and mindsets around actually conversations that we perceive to be difficult. How might you go about handling those with less difficulty?
And Difficult People was one of our more popular episodes. And that's why we thought doing a follow-up to actually talk about the actual nitty-gritty of the conversation rather than the person. And we thought, who do we know who's an expert and good at talking about difficult people? Well, that's got to be Amanda. So we struggle with it. So we thought we'd bring you in. So what's your perspective on having difficult conversations?
So it doesn't surprise me that that was a popular podcast edition. And in business, I think practically every business that I've worked in and operated from a learning and development consultancy perspective is one of those topics that comes up in all businesses. How do we handle difficult conversations? Very often in the work environment, we rebrand that to how do we have productive conversations? So as I was preparing to come to this conversation, what occurred to me was actually there are probably 2 broad themes in that difficult conversations heading. One where you might perceive the relationship as difficult or the interaction in the relationship system as having conflict or potential conflict, which I think is what you were talking about more in the Difficult People episode. And so actually some more thinking about that. And then the other theme that came out a lot is training for delivering a difficult message. How do you go about delivering bad news, arguably? So for me, coming into this, I'm bringing 2 dimensions of the difficulty, I think. That sounds terrible. I don't want to be bridging the difficulty. What I want to be doing is bring...
Yeah,
so
you're bringing
how
solutions. Well, when we were thinking about expertise, you've trained people in having difficult conversations, right? So that makes you an expert. James and I have only created difficult conversations, so therefore you're streets ahead of us.
So actually, whilst we're on that topic then, what from your perspective are you thinking when you're thinking difficult conversations?
So I guess for me, when I think about difficult conversations, a couple that I've always dreaded, I didn't necessarily have particular people that I dreaded, but the conversations I found most difficult was giving negative feedback to people where I hadn't witnessed it firsthand. If I'd seen the behavior, I didn't have a problem with it. It's where I hadn't seen the behavior that I found that difficult. And I guess the other thing for me was when you had to do media appearances and the stakes were really high and you say something wrong and all of a sudden it's going to get amplified and played back. They're the 2 things I found difficult, where I didn't have the evidence for something and where the risk was very, very high.
Yeah. And James, for you?
Well, much as it might be a surprise, I have never by any organisation whatsoever been asked to be a media spokesman. So I've never, never had
I wonder why.
Now, when we started talking about this, I have to admit on my first thought was, oh, bloody hell, here we go again. This is just one of those dreadful HR courses that you've got to go on about difficult conversations, invariably linked to some stupid HR process, which forces you to have difficult conversations because you're putting people into difficult boxes. So that's where I started with this. However, I know, Amanda, what you're going to say. You're going to tell me I've got to get down off my ladder. So we'll get into that very shortly.
Yes,
That's my
quite.
perception.
Yeah, and that was a really, really good example of you at the top of your ladder, James. So maybe we should just spend a moment on that in the context of difficult conversations. Either of you come across that tool before? The ladder of inference is often referred to as.
Heard of it, used it a little bit, but not. I wouldn't say I was very familiar with it.
Yes. And you referenced it there, James, in your get off the top of your ladder. Is it one of those terms you've heard but actually not looked into?
I have actually written something about the ladder of inference, so I know all about it. I just don't apply it very well.
Yeah. So for your listeners, now we're in the space really of that where we're making those two distinctions, delivering a difficult message and much more in the relationship space. If we think about the relationship space, ladder of inference, a model developed by Chris Argyris, who was a business theorist and organizational behavioral specialist. And he referred to the ladder of inference. And what that helps you with is to think about how the situation that you find yourself in a relationship, a conversation, maybe with individuals or with teams, how your thinking about what's happening escalates quite quickly up what he calls the ladder to the very top, where you then start to behave according to your thinking. So if you picture, quite literally, a ladder, think about the rungs of the ladder. Right at the bottom of that ladder in the conversation, you have what he would call the observable data, what actually happened, what you could see or hear, what someone actually said or did. So the data, the information. What happens then is when we're in conversation, when we're in a dynamic with other people, we very quickly work up with the rungs of the ladder. So we experience the event or the situation, we actually select the data, what happened, and we choose very, very quickly what our experience of that data is. So let's say an email was sent right at the bottom of the ladder. We then notice that there was a delay in a response. So already we go, oh, that's interesting, there's a delay. Further up the ladder, there's then an interpretation of the data that we've selected. So we will apply a meaning or we'll assign some kind of attribution to it. So the email came late, that means they're ignoring me. That means they don't want to reply to me. And then attached to that, at the next rung of our ladder, we make some assumptions around that. The belief that we're going to apply, that if they're ignoring me, they haven't replied, they're avoiding me, it's because they don't respect my time. They don't think I'm important enough. They've deprioritized me. So the assumption is attached, to which further up the ladder, very, very quickly, we then draw a conclusion and we make a judgment about them. So that's because they're unreliable. That's because they're not trustworthy. And again, once again, then add into that any beliefs that we've had about this kind of behavior in the past. So reinforced by the views that we hold already, data or experiences that we've had previously. And finally, top of ladder, which is what James was talking about, our observation, our reaction, or the action that we take, having passed very, very quickly through all of those steps. Is this making sense so far?
So just check that I understand. So at the bottom, you've got the facts. And then as you go up the ladder, you're blowing everything out of proportions and talking about your perceptions and layering stories onto it. And at the top of the ladder is the outcome is, as a result of doing that, you now behave in a certain way, which actually can be quite removed from the facts because it's all about the stories that you've told as you've gone up the ladder.
Perfect.
Well, let me give you an example, not one that covers me in glory. The other day, I was trying to pull into my drive. I've got this stupid big Volvo, which has got a turning circle of a small ship, right? And some idiot taxi driver had parked across the road the other side of me. So I'm struggling to get in. So I have to do like a 27-point turn to get into my driveway. So I'm not in the best of moods to start off with. Anyway, and then so we're doing this turn. I start to reverse back towards this taxi driver and he honks his horn. Now, all of a sudden the action, he honked his horn. My belief, that's aggressive. People who honk their horns are aggressive. Before I knew it, I'm out of the car and I'm screaming at this clown who's then parked across my drive and and he looked at me And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, mate, I thought you were going to reverse into me." At which point I then fell pretty bad. What did you do that for, you prat? And fell back down the ladder very quickly and bam, yeah. I mean, I look like a complete nerd. But it's just, that is the case in point, isn't it? You see something, you take different meaning from it. And yeah, it triggers you and off you get. So there you go. How's that for a fabulous example?
Yeah, really good example. And so why that's...
My wife didn't think it was a very
Well, I
good
think
example.
in your the other example, Amanda, that James was quoting himself was his response to your question about difficult conversations. So straight away he started on it's all HR courses. It's conversations that HR cause that make it difficult. They don't need to be difficult. So that's taking a question and then building and building and building, and the outcome is, well, it's all nonsense, isn't it? When actually the reality is some conversations are difficult.
And the point in difficult conversations is we don't notice that. So we don't see that happening. We don't, it occurs and we act out of the top of our ladder. Hey, guess what? When we're talking to someone else, interestingly enough, they will also have then a reaction in reaction to our behavior. And so if you're not very careful, you can see how quickly that escalates into an argument or a conflict situation.
It's like a game of snakes and ladders, but where ladders are all bad because you're just going up them, and you've got to find the way of going down things and de-escalating things down to focus on the facts.
Exactly.
Our podcast is all about helping people, teams and organisations perform better and enjoy work more.
And I go as far as saying that we believe that everyone and every team has the potential to transform their performance by optimising what they currently do.
So if you'd like to discuss how we can help you transform your performance, then get in touch or maybe check out our website. We also do speaking events, mentoring and advice work as well.
So totally get the concepts, very good at running up the ladder.
Yeah.
And what do I do differently then? How do I
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And so that's why it's really quite interesting when we look at difficult conversations. What made this conversation difficult? The metaphor of the ladder is interesting. People can kind of get to grips with that really, really quite quickly. And then the job is walking them back down the ladder, essentially. So if you can have people buy into the notion that actually I've processed that very, very quickly, I've attached a lot of assumptions and beliefs to it. Let's go right back to what actually happened, what was actually said, and then very more accurately process what else could be true in this scenario. Now, that's a very rational process. I realize it's not something that's easy to do when there's a lot of emotion attached, but as a tool for helping people to de-escalate what they perceive to be difficult, or even to prepare for a difficult conversation, understanding what's my normal reaction, or how do I normally react when I'm exposed to this person or situation. Using the metaphor of the ladder, it's a helpful way to explore what's going on or what typically is the trigger in this conversation for me. And then how could it be interpreted differently if we walk right back to the data itself?
And if I think back, Amanda, one of the examples I would have is, there might be an individual that I worked with that I'd think was very manipulative. And therefore, every interaction we had, whether it's an email or a face-to-face or whatever it was, I always had that in the back of my head. So I was always interpreting their behavior through, this is manipulative, isn't it? And not actually sticking to the facts of what they said and what they communicated. And I was thinking more about my interpretation of it. And that blinded me. So rather than thinking they're difficult, they're manipulative, actually deal with the facts of the interaction.
Yes. I once went through some training. So I was in the training myself, which I thought was really powerful, by the same group, by Chris Ardress and a team of people. One of the exercises he had us do then was something called a left-hand column exercise. Really useful, actually, when you think, I find myself in a difficult situation with this person quite regularly. And that's almost to write a script. So take a piece of paper, divide it in two. On the left-hand side, write down what was said in this conversation. Record the actual words, what they said, what you said, what they said, what you said. And then the right-hand side, actually, how did you feel? what did you believe? What was your reaction in response to? It's quite an analytical approach, I would guess, James. You'll have to tell me whether you agree with that or not. But actually, you write down the conversation as a script. In the right-hand column, then you write what your emotion was, what your reaction was, what interpretations you made. So you kind of lay out on a page almost that pool of data that we were talking about, what was actually said, and then your interpretation of it. And you can examine then in that way, what's triggering me in this? What fear, what belief is this creating in me that I'm acting out of as I say whatever I say next? And sometimes that can be, I come back in full on fight mode. So I'm in a conflict or an argument situation. Or it could be actually at that point I felt fearful, so I withdrew. I don't say anything at that point. All going through the analytical process, helps you to understand where might I make different choices? Where might I alter my behavior? Because to your point in the last podcast, we can't change the other person, just ourselves. Where am I doing or taking making a reaction that is helpful to me and influencing this conversation in the way that I'd like it to go? Where might I make different choices? So again, it takes time. It takes a little bit of thinking about, but actually it's really useful for examining what's really happening here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a lot of it is just about being able to understand yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, and what triggers you.
Yeah.
And then they're interesting coming back to my in contretemps with the taxi driver to know why it is. Probably something deep and meaningful in my history. People honking their horns to just think it's rude and it just sets me off. Yeah. But actually being aware of that fact and not responding to it is a really powerful thing.
Gets you to try something different.
Yeah. So we talked about two types of difficult conversations. That's the relationship, and we've got the ladder inference and the analyzing the conversation pattern and your triggers. But the second part was difficult messages. So what's your take on difficult messages then, Amanda?
Yes. So, yeah, thank you for that. So for me, again, linked to everything that you were saying in the last podcast about deep caring, about what's my intention as I go into this conversation. But the tips, I think, fall into 4 buckets. 1, before the conversation. So how do I get clear about what the purpose of this conversation is? Can I be clean and precise about what it is I'm trying to get across? Then knowing your own likely triggers in that conversation, what might show up for me and how do I want to be if that shows up in this conversation? And then arguably, what's the structure going to look like? So there's going to be private conversation. Do I need to make sure that it's scheduled to happen, in out of sight and out of earshot of other people? Where are we going to place ourselves? How's the person going to react when I say I want to talk to them about this? What's their emotional state? Are they ready right now to hear what I want to talk to them about? And then what's the style I'm going to adopt as I get into that conversation? Am I going to be very matter of fact and clinical about it? Am I going to show up with deep caring or sport? How am I going to be? So preparation, first of all. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, we touched on it in the past. Just thinking about the conversation or the questions you're going to ask. We just go into these things. And if you spent less time worrying about it or dreading it and more time planning what you're actually going to do in it. So it's just shifting that energy from worry and anxiety to actually a positive action I can take is to prepare that conversation.
Exactly that.
And risk of banging on about our old favourite, but purpose. What are you having the conversation for?
Yeah, exactly that. What am I actually trying to achieve through this? Then moving into the actual conversation itself. So starting with what's the environment we're going to create here? How can you create safety, psychological safety in that conversation? Using I statements, owning your message. So particularly the feedback scenario, I thought was really interesting that you were describing earlier, Jimmy. If it's other people's observation, it is a lot harder, of course it is.
Yeah.
So what's your ownership? What's that going to look like in this particular conversation? Not that whole everyone says this about you scenario that you're bringing, but actually what I want to achieve, what I want to discuss.
In my example, when I could say it was incredibly easier than when I was saying I didn't have the first hand. Almost the reverse supports what you're saying. If I had seen the behavior and I could say, I've seen when that happens.
Yeah.
That didn't feel like a difficult conversation to me. Where I hadn't seen it and I couldn't use the I, that felt difficult for me.
Yeah, exactly that. The other tip, plain and clear language, to your point about sort of what James would call an HR-driven scenario. But let's not bring language that people don't understand. Like, what is this conversation all about? Can we use plain, straightforward language? Let's not fluff it up with lots of, how are you, what we're doing here, and all that kind of stuff, which is meant to soften, but actually
Gets
be
the
really
point.
direct, plain, straightforward language. Yeah. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Then listening deeply. At that point, stop talking. What's going on? What's the reaction? Pauses when needed to let the person then react, say, ask questions, let them be present in this conversation, let them be contributing. Let them be silent for a while as well, not rushing. What's on your mind? What are you thinking? But giving them space, letting them process. And then something really important about not trying to fix emotion. So if you've been in a situation which is difficult, you're going to land a difficult message, i.e. one that has the potential to hurt someone or create fear. Who knows? Allow that reaction. You don't have to soften that. Acknowledging and empathizing that that's occurring. You don't have to fix it. You can't make it better because actually it's been created by the scenario, but you can be present to that emotion.
Yeah.
Which is not always easy. What you tend to find in difficult conversations is people
Want to move on and get out.
Message, yeah. And then either want to run, extract themselves, or make it all right. And actually that's conflicting and confusing and not helpful. Something then about next steps, if that's appropriate, even if that's let's follow up on this conversation tomorrow when you've had time to think about it, or next week. An invitation to, would you like to talk about some options right now? Really, really helpful, particularly in those difficult conversations. Say you were having to do something as extreme as fire someone, let them go. Just creating space for them to come back to the conversation when they've had time to process it. In that conversation makes the initial one that little bit easier.
Even just on the next steps, it's just being clear about what's been agreed as well. So when you've had a difficult conversation, so for example, talking to somebody about their behavior, have they actually really understood it? And is there a commitment to doing something different in the future?
Good point. Absolutely. So in those process steps, yes, the bit before, the bit during the conversation, then what the next steps will be. And absolutely take your point there. What's going to happen behaviorally? What are you going to commit to? Or what's going to happen next in the process? Both of those things really, really important. And then afterwards, for yourself as much as anything, is reflection time. Pausing to say, how did that conversation go? What went well? What might I learn from how that conversation went? All goes for helping. It doesn't necessarily remove that kind of the perception of difficulty, but actually it helps you to manage that difficult conversation more effectively, I would say, and as a process for preparing yourself and then learning from afterwards.
So very, very comprehensive steps on how to actually deliver the message.
So that's very helpful, Amanda. Presumably there's something we could put in the show notes, and if I add those, people can have a look at it if they want to.
Yeah, just a little flow for that. Yeah, let's do that.
We hope you're enjoying and getting value from listening to our podcast.
If you are, please can you share it online on social media with friends and colleagues?
We appreciate 5-star reviews, and we really do, but any feedback on how we can improve or subject that you'd like us to cover, just drop us a line and get in touch.
This all helps us bring the best quality show to you to ensure that you can improve your performance and enjoyment at work. Excellent. So that's the messages, that's the relationship stuff. One of the things that strikes me, Amanda, being going through this with you, that a lot of what you think about when it comes to either difficult people or difficult conversations, a lot of it is what's in your control and what's in your head, and what's in your head influences whether a conversation or a person is perceived to be difficult.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think it is. And again, back to the training from the fabulous Mr. Argerich that I was lucky enough to go through is a model that I've heard referenced many, many times, is kind of two mindsets. So if you think of the first one, very often when we're in conversation with people, we start or we bring to the conversation. Let's imagine a work scenario where I've got to come and present to you two guys and you're difficult. I'm on your team. I want us to do something. So I've already got this whole story in my head that this is going to be a difficult show. It's a difficult conversation. So I come in from the mindset of, I've done some work. I think this is what we need to do. It's my job now to come and convince you. So I'm ready and armed with whatever you throw at me. I'm going to bring my defensive reasoning. I just justify why I think it needs to be the way it needs to think. My job is about persuading you and convincing you. And pretty much, unless I get through all of that and survive all of that, then I've not been successful. Model one.
For what you really sends, you come into it with a very combative mindset.
Coming in with a position, which I am holding on to and going to defend. And you two, I know, are just going to try and shoot me down all the ways you can. So I'm ready for that. Yes, essentially that. And clearly I'm overstating it, but it's really interesting if you think about what is the mindset I'm taking into this conversation. Very often, that's what it looks like. I'm right, and it's my job to persuade you. There is an alternative, which is a much more conducive to productive conversations, which is that partly I have a great idea here, but I don't know the whole story. So I'm going to come to this conversation with what I believe we should do based on the information that I have, but it's not the whole story. By being in dialogue with you, by being in an open, sharing, reasoning, a conversation of inquiry where I test my thinking with you, you add and build my thinking. So instead now of you bringing your criticism, what happens is the experience I create is, Jimmy, James, what do you think about this notion that I'm bringing? What would have to be true for this to be right? What am I not seeing? So the mindset now I'm bringing, not so much is convincing, but it's about collaborating. It's about inviting you to join with me in actually exploring the premise I'm holding. You may bring extra information that when I know it might, in fact, change my idea, or actually you build my idea and will cover any gaps that I've got. So we end up with an even better product. So what you've moved into is more of a learning conversation, a stance of inquiry and invitation to input and collaborate. And result often is much stronger relationships, a high trust, psychologically safe environment, because now I'm not convincing you. It's an invitation to join with me. And when we join, I learn something, you learn something, and a relationship feels anything but difficult, feels much more generative and enjoyable, arguably. Does that make sense?
It does. And I reckon if you could think back to the conversations, the people that you feel difficult, I think to your point, you would have more of the model one combative mindset and you'd have approached it with that. Yes. But if you approached it with a collaborative mindset, would then the difficult person, difficult relationship, difficult messages, difficult conversation, it would be fundamentally different.
Yeah. The other person feels heard, invited to contribute. You can relax a little bit because now their observational input doesn't feel like a criticism, a critique of you. It feels like a contribution to the work, that joint problem solving. And that's something you can influence by your approach.
So in summary, if you think about the ladder of inference and how you're going up and down your ladder and what's the facts that sit at the bottom of your ladder, if you then do the steps that you talked about in terms of preparing for the conversation, doing the conversation and reflecting on the conversation, and think about how do you approach things with a collaborative mindset rather than a combative, to our point at the start, difficult conversations would now not be difficult. So exactly, that's what we promised. We said Amanda would come along and share some insights that would make difficult conversations easy. So I think he's done a cracking job on that.
Great. It's been a pleasure joining with you on that. Not scary at all.
Say it about your media, Amanda.
She's approaching it with a collaborative mindset, though, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
Lovely.
Thanks very
Thank
much,
you very
Amanda.
much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Speak to you
See
later.
you.
Cheers now.
Bye.
Ta-ra.
Our podcast is all about helping people, teams and organisations perform better and enjoy work more.
And I go as far as saying that we believe that everyone and every team has the potential to transform their performance by optimising what they currently do.
So if you'd like to discuss how we can help you transform your performance, then get in touch or maybe check out our website. We also do speaking events, mentoring and advice work as well.